your family way too long. So what did we lose? So can you imagine going through one of your relatives' basement or attic and coming across a manuscript or a good painting, or maybe just a sketch by Picasso? Maybe it's Picasso's worst sketch, but it had his name on it, you would keep it, right? Or maybe if it was a painting by no one particularly famous, right? But if it was a good painting, or a good music lyric, or anything of that nature, you would definitely keep it. You wouldn't throw it in the shredder, you wouldn't burn it, you wouldn't, you would keep this thing, because as human beings, we are attracted to beauty and art. That's what we like in our lives, okay? I live in a Dutch colonial that was built in 1930. When we did some renovations, we found all kinds of stuff in the walls. We found the original certificate of occupancy from the owner. It turned out the owner was an optometrist, so I found a school in the Midwest. We found newspapers from that era. We also found these old perfume bottles, that were really just pretty. My wife loved them. And she grabbed a couple and she kept it on her bureau, And we thought nothing of it. They were just sort of beautiful little objects that she kept on her bureau, nothing. One day a friend visited, she saw the perfume bottle, she got very excited because she was convinced that it had come from Paris and it was designed by a famous designer and was worth like lots of money. So she looked it up, she went on this little quest, and she found out that it was just a knockoff. It wasn't particularly valuable. But the bottle remains on my wife's bureau because despite all that, it's still a pretty object. And now we have a story to tell about it, right? And the bottle has become a part of us, and the bottle has become a part of our home, okay? So much like that, our buildings are sort of a part of us. So the Sanborn had a lot of people in its 100-year history that had a connection to it, that had stories to tell about it, that had friends and relatives, that shared experiences there. So it wasn't just a building. It was a civic building, neoclassical style, whatever you want to call it, that goes all the way back to something that, it's actually quite common in northern New England and anywhere east of Minnesota. But this architecture was given to us by none other than Thomas Jefferson. When Thomas Jefferson was trying to form a nation, he understood how important it was that our public buildings have a civic presence. So he went back to the democratic ideals of the Greek time, and he took the temple that was, known, and he said, that's what the temple facade is, that's what our buildings need to be. Our civic buildings, our public buildings will have this Greek temple facade. And we adopted that, and it wasn't until we became a nation that had its own American aesthetic. It wasn't until, Richardson and the shingle style and Frank Lloyd Wright that, prior to those famed great architects, we relied and we took our cultural identity from everything that was going on in Europe. Okay. So, even though there are probably hundreds of these across the United States, it is still a significant building because every time you see colonial architecture, it's sort of like a homecoming. You can go down to Disney World and go through the, I don't know what that's called, where they have like different countries. And then all of a sudden you come to the American portion and they have this kind of like brick colonial architecture. And immediately you feel at home. And you have the same warm and fuzzy feeling that you have after you've been on a long journey and you're coming home and you see that landmark building. There's always a landmark building that tells you, that announces you're close to home. And no matter how good or how exotic or how beautiful the place was that you just visited, you were always happy to be home. So these buildings form communities. And these buildings are very much a part of us. And you don't take these buildings and demolish them, because these buildings are significant. They define our culture and they define who we are. So what we lost in a matter of great brutality, in a matter of a few days, David, I don't know if you have the picture. So what we lost in a matter of a few days was a building that had served as a gateway, that in its own time, when it was built as a beacon, and the hope was that it would sort of influence development. These days is what we would call an incubator building. You put this building up, and then you hope that development sort of happens between the gateway building and then the downtown. We lost that beacon, we lost the gateway. We lost the stories. We lost the human connection. We lost a really well-built building of materials and craftsmanship that is unavailable to us anymore. We don't have these timbers. We don't have the foundations that supported this. They were like, boulders this big, We don't have the craftsmanship. We don't have the care. This was a building that was actually very well preserved. It may have looked run down, but it was all cosmetic. And many of these buildings have been restored, and they're magnificent. If you don't believe me, just go up to Waterbury and look at their City Hall, and look at the Palace Theater. Come to Internazi, come to our office downtown Bridgeport, and experience what a great space that is. It's amazing. The pictures don't do it justice. You have to experience the space. We also lost lots of opportunities. There were people who were willing to buy this building. Bob Holstead, my God, he devoted his whole life and spent so much time manually trying to save this building, closing it off to people who shouldn't have been in there, and just doing all kinds of, the real work that you need to save this kind of thing. But we had opportunities to use this building and to obtain some grants and have it be a training site, because how many high school kids these days are going into the trades and learning carpentry? Hardly no one. No one in high school goes into the trades anymore. But this was an opportunity to have some inner city kids, train, learn craftsmanship, and the developer could have given that opportunity. Can you imagine the difference in the life of God knows how many kids the reconstruction or the restoration of this building would have made? It wouldn't have just been the end process, which would have been a beautifully restored building and, hopefully some sort of little mini renaissance for that particular area. But the process itself would have led to more stories, more human element, and more positive things happening, So I can't, so when we talk about the loss is not just a financial thing. The loss is, it's like losing, if you've lost a close relative, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you lose a close relative, you lose essentially a part of you. And that's the kind of loss that we're talking about. It's nothing that we can put a number on it, or some dollar sign. It's a part of our cultural heritage, which needs to, luckily here I'm preaching to the choir. You all know this, thank God you're here. We're in a safe zone here. But out there's like a lot of work to be done. Out there, we need to tell everyone these stories. We need to share these stories. We need to talk to people in human terms so that they understand that it's not just a building. It's not just some bricks. It's it's us. All right. And I think now we're going to move on to positive things. The private, you know, it had gone from a public library to a bank to then a sort of a government-funded agency, you know, that served the local community. And then the city had sold it to a private developer. You know, someone had bought it with the hope of, you know, making a return on their investment. And they held it for 10 years. And, you know, unfortunately, they were sort of like a mom-and-pop developer. They didn't really understand it. They didn't know how to go about the process. And it just sat there for 10 years. And then along came some commercial person who understood not the value of the building and didn't care about the value of the building, but understood the value of the lot. And that's what they wanted at all costs. And one of their stipulations in the sale was, well, you must remove the building.
And there's no Bridgeport Preservation Society, or that knew about this potential disaster, I don't understand.
Well, a lot of people tried, but you know,
Yeah.
when it's not a publicly owned building, when it's a privately owned building,
So?
you know, there's very limited. Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues that we need to address. I think, you know, what we're trying to move to in Bridgeport is, and what I've been preaching to them for like 10, 20 years. I said, you know, it's like, guys, you know, I love the 60s, but that was like a long time ago. You know, it's like, if you want to save something, you need to buy it and own it, you know. That's the only way to do anything.
No, just to back up Neil's story. My name's Kevin. I'm from Bridgeport, along with Bob Halstead, and we were real activists in this process. And Pete Spain, our city councilman, we printed up Save the Sanborn petitions and had them in coffee shops. And even though we reached our petition levels, it wasn't enough. We had rallies. We were on News 12. And are you able to go back one slide to show the front of the building? I just wanted to touch. The mural in the front of the building is a mural of basically the story of Puerto Rican immigration to America and what was left behind in Puerto Rico and what they bought to America, and in this case to Bridgeport. It was all a tile mosaic, and I've been documenting this whole saga of this building, and I have video and pictures that I hope to post to this event tonight, so you can see it. But great presentation, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, I was like one of the tears, because I had seen that mural 1,000 times, and I didn't really know what was there, or didn't really understand it until someone, with the artist present, explained the meaning of that mural, and how that was essentially, you know, it's the typical immigrant dream, you know. But that was done, you know, with this very last tenant, by the very last tenant, before it was sold to the private developer. But, you know, the mural, you know, even though we may have different feelings about it, it meant a lot to a lot of people, you know. It had a lot of stories associated with it.
I'm Todd Bryant. I worked also with Pete Spain, attempting to save this building, and the Bridgeport city government was complicit in this from the beginning, as far as I can tell. I have no documentation for this except their own actions. And this project needed 5 variances, all of which were economic. None of which had anything to do with the lot. All of those variances were illegal, based on Connecticut state law. Didn't matter. The building was demolished, and just yesterday, they granted the variances on the vacant lot. So if that doesn't tell you the story, I don't know what does. And that's the kind of thing that it's extremely difficult to fight.
Yeah, trust me when I tell you it wasn't for lack of effort. I mean, we had around close to 1,000 signatures at one time. There were several meetings and rallies and all kinds of stuff, and people turned out for zoning meetings, so on and so forth. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we're not preaching to the choir. We're preaching, you know, we're sort sort of bang your heads up against the wall with some other folks. And we have to sort of like lick our wounds and keep going, because there's gonna be other Sanborns out there that we need to save. And, you know, you lose a fight, you learn from the experience of losing. And I don't know about you, but every time someone beats me down, I come back bigger and stronger.
Can I add something? So, in Norwalk, 20 years ago, so, it was, we had similar kinds of things where, the government was the city government was definitely not supportive of preservation. So, I, Todd, and particularly Todd, over a period of many years, helped organize Norwalk, helped build bridges to economic development people, the politicians, general public. And I would say Norwalk today, you correct me if I'm wrong, but Norwalk today is much, more aware of the value of these types of buildings than it was then. And I think Bridgeport may have that opportunity. It's still, you gotta stick to it, and you gotta get organized, and you gotta go through this, multifaceted education process. But it's possible, and Bridgeport has amazing resources, historic resources.
Yeah, it's a waterfront city.
We had the law on our side, it turned out, because the building was listed.
Yeah, right, that's true. So, getting things listed, I mean, some of the stuff we say wasn't listed as well. I think we could do another, session sometime just on like fighting the fight, how individual cases that we worked on. But there is, what I'm trying to say is there is hope, is what I'm trying to say, and it just, requires stick-to-itiveness and being proactive in